Is race and racism systemic and institutional in Nova Scotia? Hell yes.
Last year, a group representing several diverse communities came together to create a documentary.
This is going to be looking at a raindrop in a typhoon storm.
Learning how to outsmart their smartphones. These novice videographers sought out thinkers in the community to discuss systemic racism. They called the documentary, What Wonderful World.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I feel
people have made statements about systemic discrimination and some people being offended, saying, no, it doesn't exist.
People deny there's no racism in Nova Scotia?
Yes, what's your view?
Tell them come see me.
If you are white and speak the predominant language of your community, you probably haven't experienced systemic racism or discrimination. But it touches us all.
Parce que c'est ancré.
Because it is embedded in our systems, it is harder to detect.
C'est beaucoup moins facile à détecter.
It's just been prettied up.
The whole history of Canada is discrimination.
Given that the projects of genocide and enslavement form the foundation of our culture in North America, we should expect that anti-Black and anti-Indigenous sentiments exist in the infrastructure of all of our institutions.
I see skies of blue.
Inspired by Louis Armstrong's song, What a Wonderful World, this documentary not only helps us all understand systemic racism, but explores solutions that will benefit us all.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
There is lots of systemic racism within our healthcare system.
It's out of ignorance. It's out of, how would I say, a complex of superiority.
I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
As so beautifully said by Mark Pilek, the song What a Wonderful World makes a subtle, heartbreaking gesture to all the darkness rapping at its door. In turn, making it just hard enough for you, the listener, to entirely dismiss its optimism, at which moment the battle becomes yours.
The first thing I believe that we need to do is to raise the level of awareness.
Even though we acknowledge this is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, institutionally and systematically, the land has been taken by the government and redistributed. That even if everybody's heart tomorrow became pure as the driven snow and there was no racism in our hearts, the fact that the land is distributed the way it is would remain a structurally racist phenomena.
The so-called fathers of Confederation, what was that, 155 years ago, designed a country that excluded, was not inclusive. It was targeted for white males.
It's just a really big, difficult, sad world we live in, to be honest.
Anytime I mentioned racism, people would say in the party, well, do you have someone to back that up? And you can't do it because you're white. And I'm like, look, we're all white here. This is a small caucus of white people. So if I don't bring up issues that are important to people of color and Indigenous people, it's never going to happen.
Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Can you imagine what, say, Canada would be like if when the European settlers came here, they actually respected the people that were already here.
Oh, yeah.
We probably have quite a different world than we do right now.
Aboriginal people, they were given the responsibility to be the eye, the ear, and the voice for ones that cannot defend themselves.
Out west, they thought we were crazy for making fires in the forest, but it was beyond controlled burns. You could control a burn because then you wouldn't create these massive forest fires, but also there's certain trees that need to be at a certain temperature in order to harvest.
I think systemic racism oppresses. It's institutional. It's governmental. It lurks in the cracks and in the joints that we don't really see because it's built into the system.
Systemic discrimination is a form of discrimination that is firmly entrenched within a system, whether it be employment, education, law, healthcare, or even cultural conventions.
What can be done about it? Well, first we need to understand the history of racism. We need to understand where it comes from. We need to understand that racism has had a dramatic psychological effect on racialized people, but it has also had a dramatic psychological effect on white people.
Mi'kmaq come from an egalitarian society, so there's we each had our own roles, different but equal roles.
Historically, that racism was institutionalized. It was meant to make one group dominant. Racism and discrimination for Acadians often ends up being, for the most part, linguistic. So that's a big thing for me, and I know also for Clara, that want to have a living culture as opposed to a heritage. So in order to maintain a vibrant Acadian culture, it has to be a living culture, and that living culture is tied to language.
And the whole white privilege is, you want a quieter room, like farting in a tent. What? I asked them, what's the opposite of love? And they said, opposite of love is hate. And I said, no. My elders told me that. My elders said, no, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear.
I guess I would define it as really based on fear and ignorance, that people seem to, they don't understand sometimes that they are even being racist.
We're supposed to be in a world of human beings and common sense and love and all this, but there's so much hate. And our babies have got to walk around saying, why can't I be friends with somebody?
But as far as the racism part of it, I mean, very young. I mean, people started using the C word, a chink. That was a normal part of vocabulary.
It is so blatantly absence of the freedom of choice.
It's a different navigation for people of color than it is for, I think, people of the dominant culture. There's no question about it.
Those people with the racial ideas are in those positions, and they use that power for the way they've been taught.
When my grandfather arrived, there was a Chinese head tax, and that was legislated like from the early 1890s on the West Coast, because a lot of the people who were working in the mines, salmon canneries, saw the Chinese as a threat and competition. There's like a lot of Chinese restaurants along Godwin Street, like the north end of the city. And the Mayfair Cafe, which is across from Uniacke Square, I think was kind of like a community center, which the owner took in the neighborhood kids. And, you know, it kept them safe and off the street, sort of a thing.
My son has two older twin brothers who are Chinese, and they're Hums.
Yeah.
And I've heard that story so many times, like how the Hum family specifically has such a close connection to the Black community. Knew we needed each other to get ahead, and that was kind of the beauty of that connection. So it's really cool hearing this story from you, Albert, because I've actually heard this story countless times over the last 5 years.
I am still walking around a store being followed by a store detective. I try to make a point of going into stores that I always shop in, where I know the staff, and that way I know that I can have a safe shopping experience.
When I get to the cash, the face turns into it's stoic, no smile, no nothing. And I thought, wow, what happened to that really nice person that I just witnessed? It happens on a day-to-day basis.
It's one of those things that I experience it so often, and it's so normalized that sometimes I don't even call it what it is, because it has become just part of society. Like microaggressions, like things like being followed in a store when I'm by myself, but not when my white partner is standing beside me.
And when we are dismissing the experience of racism that a Black person expresses, that is a microaggression.
I think we have to do a lot of work to call it what it is, and then to start changing those systems and be very aware of the small pieces, like I said, the microaggressions, because those are the things that perpetuate racism within culture, because it's not something very outright. It's not people calling you names. It's not people saying really ignorant things all the time. It's just in very small, passive ways that it's normalized.
What a wonder it would be to wander, to walk anywhere we please, to not be stopped or questioned or ask for our IDs, to walk through white neighborhoods or stores or universities, to walk into court in a gown and be seen not as the defendant, but as the QC.
It's been a long time coming, but I know change is gonna come.
I challenge you to walk into a store and just walk around. I want you to see how long it takes before a floor person is on top of you. Me, I average 1 to 3 minutes.
So my daughter, never. My daughter has blonde hair, blue eyes. And my son looks more like me. My son has been called the C word twice at school, and he fought both times. Got kicked out of school both times.
I know I look white. My mother was full Mi'kmaq, and her parents were full Native. And I, as a result, sometimes know what it's like to be discriminated against.
I acknowledge my white privilege and have slowly learned about it. I'm not only am white, but I was English in Quebec. So talk about ignorance. But I see two different kinds of systemic racism and discrimination. One is the intentional one of the people who fear that they're losing their white power. The other is very subtle, and it's through ignorance.
We are 21 generations away from Christopher Columbus. Imagine how deep-rooted the notion of people being different is ingrained in who we are as human beings now. But those that resist that are oftentimes said, well, you're a troublemaker, because we're seen as an afterthought. So when the Black community or when the Indigenous community pushes up against that system has a level of uncomfortability, because the assumption is one size fits all. And we know that that's not the case. One size fits one. So when I have these conversations, when people talk about institutional racism, I try to start by talking about, think about what we already have in terms of who has advantages and who doesn't have advantages. So you don't have to use the word racism, just think about advantages and disadvantages.
When you look into the darkest night, and all you see is out of reach, don't you lose your focus in the blind. Just stop and think of me. Oh, just stop, say. Just stop.
High-tech companies started out run by and staffed by young white men. So when, for example, a camera phone was developed, it read and exposed white skin well, but had trouble recording the details of darker skin. Research labs studying health issues for years ignored sickle cell anemia because it didn't affect most of the white population. History in schools omits the facts of Black and Indigenous invention and heroism. Sometimes it is intentional, like it was when all Black soldiers were purposely taken out of the Victory March into Paris in the Second World War. But more insidious are the harder-to-prove biases. Banks that make it harder for a person of color to get a loan to start a business. Landlords who even today will not rent to African Nova Scotians. Some teachers who expect less of a student because of their race. Education itself, because it is developed by the majority, white educators, who themselves were given history that leaves out much of what really shaped our society.
What I saw, particularly in the last few years as a teacher, is more complicated, where I saw the government in an attempt, I saw them get hyper-focused on optics, on the appearance of racism. And it seemed like their attempt was more to fix the optics than to fix the issues.
More glaring examples of systemic discrimination in Canada is the Government of Canada passed a law at one point that basically prevented certain Indigenous populations from moving freely around the country, from establishing themselves and living where they wanted.
We still live under the Indian Act. We're the only group within Canada who has this governing act that affects all of us every day in our everyday life and living. We're the only group within Canada that is forced to carry a status card which shows our Indigenous status. So for the average person to understand what it feels like, what did it feel like for you when COVID was going on? When you were restricted from leaving your house and your community, from leaving your municipality, from not being able to see your mother, your fathers, your family? What did it feel like to not be able to go to a state school at the time? What did it feel like to have to show this card to do anything, your COVID immunization card? That's what it feels like every day to be Indigenous.
They colonized us and they separated us and they took away our identity.
At the time, Europe was all Christian and the Pope was considered the King of Kings. So all the kings answered to the Pope. It began with the papal bulls of 1453. In particular, it was racism against Muslims. 1492, Columbus lands on the shores here. And there's another papal bull in 1493 that says that if non-Christians cannot own land, non-Christians really have no rights. It's been used primarily to support decisions invalidating or ignoring Aboriginal possession of land in favor of colonial or post-colonial governments. It's also shaped how these governments treated and continue to treat Indigenous people through domination and dehumanization, and it gave rise to the myth of European superiority and supremacy.
In 1604, the French government tells some of its peasants that they can come to the New World and they will be given land, which really wasn't right because it wasn't theirs to be given because it belonged to the Mi'kmaq people, and they established themselves in Port Royal. For about 4 years, the Acadian people who were law-abiding, their guns was only used for hunting. They didn't kill anybody. They weren't interested. They just wanted their language, which was French, their religion, which was Catholic, and to live side by side with the Indigenous people. That's all they wanted.
Amazing. I always find how rich everybody's story is. There's just so much content and so much to be admired and so much to be thankful for. And
very much.
I think that it's such a shame that so many of us don't hear other people's stories.
The French and Mi'kmaq were allies.
I wanted to get money for an Indigenous cultural center here in Millbrook First Nations. And the minister didn't understand why they were being so passionate about having to get this money. And I said, well, you're from Cape Breton, right? I said, and so you probably learned some like Gaelic songs and dances when you were younger. And she was like, yes. And I said, right. Well, that was taken away from this community. The Indigenous peoples were told it was against the law to do their dances. They couldn't speak their own language.
In many countries, it is not uncommon to speak more than one language, sometimes many. In North America, Indigenous languages were illegal until they all but died out. And until recently, the French language was actively suppressed outside of Quebec.
In Nova Scotia, what happened, the teachers would come in and instruct the students in French, but all the textbooks were English. That's been rectified with the formation of the Conseil scolaire acadien provincial because they actually run French schools. All materials are in French. It is the language of instruction. I mean, the guarantees that Francophones had a confederation had really did not come to fruition until people started doing court challenges using the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's what I call, that is a sort of a structural discrimination because those rights were granted to Anglophones in Quebec, but they were not granted other areas of Canada without somebody going to court to fight for them. A lot of these rights should have been granted a long time ago, and it would have really helped preserve the language and the culture.
Je te le dis, je te le chante, je te le crie, je te le montre.
Assimilation was supposed to be systematic. It was supposed to happen. In the 1950s, we didn't know anything about our history. In grade 8, the history book was called History of Nova Scotia. Chapter 11, second page, third paragraph said, and then the Acadians were deported, and then it went on to another topic.
When Noretta Johnny opened her still, we danced. The folks on the other side of the dune, they did not like it.
Racism is North America's original sin. There was the anti-Indigenous racism that enabled the Europeans to essentially attempt to genocide First Nations and to drive them off the land, and then of course there's the anti-Black racism that enabled Europeans to enslave Africans.
There's a man by the name of Giassi Simons, and Giassi Simons is African Nova Scotian and is a caseworker at the Department of Social Services. In January of 2017, he was walking across the street with 4 white women from his workplace.
When he got back to the office, he was arrested, handcuffed in front of his co-workers, and fined for jaywalking. The white women were not.
I remember an RCMP cruiser was coming towards me, and all of a sudden it slowed down. And I was, for the first time as an Indigenous woman, I was terrified because a lot of Indigenous women do go missing. And I have to say that the women that I've spoken to have a lot of fear of the RCMP and the police.
They were historically created to rein us in and bring us to residential school.
There's a few police forces that have said, no, that doesn't exist here. It doesn't exist because you can't see it. So I think there's a level of awareness. Probably the first job is to raise the level of awareness so that people can start understanding what it is, believing that it exists, and then start being able to identify it where it is.
So I went to the Walmart and did my shopping and came out of there, and I was asked for my receipt. And so coming from the Caribbean, what popped up in my head was, hey, Walmart has a policy, when you're coming out of the store, somebody asks you to see your receipt. And so I went home and spoke to friends. They said to me, let's try this a different way. So we went back to the same Walmart and stood there for half an hour and observed who was being asked to show their receipts. And then I had to sadly acknowledge, yes, racism.
I was born here. I grew up here. Most of my friends are Canadian and born here. But yet people who I just meet ask me, where are you from? And I say, Halifax. And then they say, where are you really from? To me, that's a form of harassment because I'm a Haligonian. When did your grandfather arrive? 100 years ago from England?
We're still doing land title fighting. We're still being treated like second-class citizens, even though our family lineage is here longer than some of these people exhibiting racist behavior towards us.
Prior to 1960, we weren't allowed to go to public schools in which we can access more education. And more brave and diligent Aboriginal people, their commitment was so great that they managed to endure those racisms and hardships and got themselves educated.
Because I work in a university, I deal with people who are doing their research, and I have told them, you're going to have to spend the time to research in an ethical way, which means getting to know the Indigenous community that you're going to be working with.
Yeah, and part of that is having an open mind, but it's not about having just an open mind to listen. It's about having an open mind to be willing to change the way you think or understand something.
So systemic racism is in police forces and in education. It should be no surprise that it is in the healthcare system as well.
If a person presents to the emergency department, and if it's a young black male and they're presenting with pain, like they've put their back out at work or something like this, the perception might be that they're drug seeking. And it's been identified by Afro-Canadian physicians that are living here in Nova Scotia that they have had issues with patients and with other physicians.
And I see it all the time in terms of patients being dismissed. People don't believe their pain. I've had especially Indigenous women be dismissed by doctors and other medical healthcare professionals that say they're having pain, and they say, oh, you're drug seeking, or it's just arthritis. No one ever does any investigations. And I had someone who was extended family member who had complained for years about pain, had a known history of cancer, was ignored multiple times because they had unstable housing, Nobody listened. And when they finally had someone do scans, their cancer had metastasized through their whole body. And the pain in their legs was because they had bone spurs and tumors in the bone.
We Canadians tend to look at other countries and tell ourselves, we're not racist like them. Unfortunately, this is not true.
In the States, it was a whole different game. I went back and I worked with CBS News 7 years, and I never had any problems. As a matter of fact, I was almost a bonus to the crew. I mean, wow, I was 6 feet tall. I was in damn good shape. I spoke French and English. That was a plus, especially in New York. So, and when you're traveling around the world, it's good to speak more than one language.
We look at the States and talking about very often how bad it is down there. But in a lot of ways, we've got the same thing here.
Many white English are not aware of just how prevalent racism is because they don't live it every day like Dolly.
If I go to the United States, when I go to every state, my family down there, I know we are wanted, we are not wanted, but here, you still got, the mask is still on.
In one particular case, there was a young Black gentleman in the writing whose father came to me and said, look, he has applied to the Department of Transportation over and over again, and he was in line, but he's been looked over 3 times, and 3 times white guys have gotten the job.
Racism is not an Indigenous issue. It's not a Black issue.
I have walked that long road to freedom. I tried not to falter and fall down in the road.
Nor is it an immigrant issue. It's an issue that affects all of society. Diversity is good for business, good for problem solving, and good for dealing with crises. A diverse group of people can bring together a wide range of perspectives, ideas, and experiences. This can lead to more creative and innovative solutions to problems or challenges. Also, having more than one language makes it easier to do international business. Dr. Vandana Shiva reminds us that uniformity is not nature's way. Diversity is nature's way. So why do we humans so often fear difference in those we perceive to be the other? In fact, several studies have found that companies with an ethnically diverse workforce perform better financially than those with a more homogeneous staff.
If you own a business and people within your business are racist, it will affect you greatly.
Change begins with an acceptance that something needs to change.
Research also suggests that diverse teams are more effective. Given that this is the case, employee retention should be a priority.
There's no education like working side by side with someone of a different background than yourself. Now, the good news of that is that diversity provides a de facto education. The bad news, of course, is that the racialized person ends up not only having to do their job, but also having to educate their coworkers about racism.
We want our young people to kind of grow and take on more academic stance in terms of moving up the ladder. But realistically, the amount of people that you see of color as you move up shrinks, and so the protection that you have from each other shrinks.
Until there is diverse representation in decision-making roles, systemic racism and discrimination will persist and keep hundreds of thousands of Canadians from reaching their true potential. And Canada is the poorer for it.
And so how do we try to elevate this so that the burden is not always on us? Because it is draining. It is really, really draining.
I've been dealing with racism my whole life, and it gets tiring.
Michelle decided to leave the university who hired her. She found dealing with the racism was just too much work.
It was a very difficult decision because it was, something that granted me a job for life. But if you don't treat the person in a respectful way, they're not going to stay. And that's been the constant theme with my friends across Canada who work in universities. They find it hard to work in an institution that's not willing to do the work. This self-imposed exile is not my wish. To see myself in a corner where no one can hear my cries, my pain, or see my self-worth. My birth is political, controversial. Yes, this land is my land. Your sense of entitlement does not give you the right to insult me with words forced upon me since birth. I don't wear my culture daily, I live it. I don't hide my culture, I feel it.
And I told him if that's the way the company viewed people like me, then I really wanted nothing to do with what is going on there.
Ron was headhunted from the UK for his education and skill. He was a valued employee who ran an excellent department. When he left his position, having felt repercussions for speaking up, the replacement mishandled the department so badly that now the company is being sued.
We get used a lot at the same time because institutions are being told by the federal governments that if you want the funding, you're going to have equity.
I'd call him up and I'd say, hey, any work happening? I said, oh man, we've been so busy, we didn't have a chance to call you, Nick. Well, I said, that's great, I'm looking for work. I said, we're not doing anything Indian. Is my sound that bad that I can't? Anyway.
I've been called a token Acadian at times.
Well, and especially in Canada.
It took me a while because I liked my job. Before I really realized the behavior, the microaggressions that were being used against me and my coworkers. When it finally hit, I, of course, was coined angry. I was basically used and told that, no matter what my job entailed, I wasn't worth earning more or getting more or being more. So I moved on.
Wonderful to not have your resume discarded because of your last name or address. To wear your hair the way it grows out of your head. To wear a turban or hijab unmolested. To not have your death excused because of how you dress. Wonderful to thrive and bloom. To not have high blood pressure because of stress. Wonderful to be alive.
Those who have not experienced systemic racism sometimes don't even know what it is.
I've taken the time to stop and rest for a while and look back on the valley below. But I dare not linger, for my walk it isn't over. So many miles left to go.
So when I first wanted to introduce my private members bill, an act to address environmental racism, they had a big kind of argument about what is racism.
Wonderful to be believed. Wonderful to not die of preventable disease. No garbage dump or toxic waste in your streams. Wonderful for your elders to live out their lives on their own property. Wonderful to be free.
With racism and discrimination so deeply embedded in our culture for centuries, how can we turn the ship around?
We all have a right to grow and see ourselves and our children progressing through life in the way that everybody else progressed through life.
So what do we do about it?
For starters, I would talk about democracy. A lot of people point to the United States as a model of democracy and a republic, but that is modeled after the Haudenosaunee government, or what people call sometimes the Iroquois Confederacy, but it's the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And it was the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin in particular, who studied the government of the Haudenosaunee and saw how it was run, that it was that government of the people, for the people, by the people, which he adopted for the United States.
And I have to say that my success, I can give you a load of people and you'll say, gee, her people were diverse. Absolutely they were.
And we need to work together.
There has to be some way of making sure that the police are not just trained, but there's somebody watching the police to make sure that the interactions are correct.
We understand you can't always be culturally safe because it is hard to be aware of everybody's culture and everybody's backgrounds. You definitely can't be culturally competent because there is no way to possibly know everything about every person and every person's individual culture. But we can be culturally humble. We can come into spaces knowing that we don't know and being okay with that. And being okay telling people, I don't know, but I'd like to do the work. Because it's okay to not know, but then you have to take responsibility for your ignorance. And so to do things like going to workshops, going to talks, doing things where people are being compensated for their knowledge, for their understanding, their expertise, and also valuing that expertise. Because a lot of times, especially with Indigenous people, our knowledge base is devalued because it doesn't necessarily fall into the colonial construct of what valuable education is and what valuable knowledge is. So I think the biggest thing is people just need to be okay not knowing and then do the work to fill the gaps and not expect the marginalized groups they're dealing with to do all the heavy lifting for them.
Until we are at a level where any task is good enough for anybody, we're not going to be moving away from racism. We're not going to be moving away from barriers.
When you look at the hierarchy in the administration, you still see that most of the administration is Caucasian.
I find that once people start working together, everyone gets to know each other.
In the same way that we're across the province and we're getting to know each other, and I would have to say really like each other.
Yeah.
But we don't know each other, so we don't understand other cultures because we don't have that interaction.
To reach those targets, I would say it should be us or that particular community who are the ones to determine whether or not those targets and needs have been addressed from within the community rather than top heavy from the government down.
So it's gotta be all of us in the different ethnic to actually come up with that, and and then you can get a good quality product.
Just dedicating time as a management team to look at your policies and take a first crack at, well, what do we think could be racist in here?
Become more engaged in municipal government.
I become a member of outreach committee, and eventually I become a diversity and inclusion officer with the department.
There's too many commonalities between us, too many similarities, and rather focus on a couple little differences.
And if everybody could do that, use their mouth and be kind to one another, what a different world we would live in.
Put your ego aside. Ask the question. You may not like the answer, but let's start somewhere and have a meaningful conversation, and maybe a friendship will come out of it. Maybe a learning will come out of it.
All of the panelists agreed the only solution is education, formal and informal education. But most education decisions are made by white people, so a lot has to change.
Education's everything, but not just formal education. It's, you know what? It's the education we get from our parents. I think the number one thing that we get, that we learn from our parents and the people that are close to us.
When you think about your favorite teacher, do you remember what they taught you, or do you remember how they treated you? My favorite teacher always treated me with the utmost respect and made me feel like a human being.
I've given presentations to organizations, and they've walked out of the room. Once again, they said, we've never known, and cry.
I don't think that the conversations should always be about people of African descent or people from the Indigenous community explaining what this is. I think it should be the reverse and say, what does whiteness mean to me? And how is my whiteness impactful to making the society either good or different?
Free love, free love, free love, free love. Hazard Island was her name.
You know, I could easily go between the black community or my black relatives, you know, to my, white relatives. It never really mattered to me. I think I was a teenager before I really realized there was anything different, you know?
The first step is to give power to those who have historically been silenced.
When I started teaching, if you graduated 40 to 45% of your Mi'kmaq students, you were doing okay, because the system was not made for Mi'kmaq students.
Now, the Mi'kmaq run their own schools much more successfully.
And since they've run their own schools, their graduation rate is 89%.
In the words of Elder Dr. Albert Marshall, when we walk together in a good way on Turtle Island, we learn we are all connected. We are never alone. We need each other. Mauikwek. Together, we are strong.
The emerging leaders in Canada see it more clearly than I might have seen it when I was there. Mm-hmm. So they are engaging in conversations, which is very positive, I think.
Right now, I somehow got the opportunity to make things right. And that's with the University of Montreal. I'm now the elder in residence.
The best way to reduce systemic racism is talking.
But when we share a meal together like this, it really brings us together.
I think as generation by generation goes through, it gets better and better. My son, for example, he's 17 years old. His buddies or his friends and stuff that are transgender or trans different or whatever, they're just whoever they are.
The solution is love and compassion. You can't transform with hate, but I do know you can with love.
You cannot hate someone that you really know. If you really know their history and you know them.
You know, as a Brit, I've done several television shows that relate to the Acadians. And it always amazed me, speaking of racism, that I was welcomed with open arms. But my ancestry is such that I wouldn't be doing that. And just the same as when I've spoken to various elders, one in particular that I think of at Eskasoni, and I think if I'd gone through what you went through, I would have probably committed murder.
Probably because of my upbringing, where I was brought up, and probably inherently there's aspects of that's racist, and I don't believe it, but it's the first thing that comes in my head, and it doesn't come out of my mouth. My belief system has absolutely changed, but it's one of the first things that crossed my mind. So I use that statement by Shiraki Hale. I said, I say to people, don't let your first thought be your last thought.
So love and compassion. And when you embrace that wonderful gift, then there's no very little chance you will abuse any life.
And why is it that children on a playground all play together? They don't care if somebody's hair is curly or straight or blonde, or they all play together. And what happens between the primary grade and grade 12? What happens to those children if it's not coming from home, from the government, from all kinds of different sources that are all related to racism and discrimination?
Let's stop fighting and do something creative.
It's about caring. It's about remembering that we are all important? Do I treat everybody with respect? Do I, no matter what is going on, do I keep that person's dignity intact? Enemies of humanity are paternalism, are racism, colonialism, power, materialism, and that whole attitude, I think, of I'm just here for me. We forget we're here together.
Remember, we all had that fabric, whether we were religious or not, we all came into that fabric of right and wrong, and we all touched that fabric. I don't know if we have that anymore.
Again, it begins with education of our children and education in the schools, because we've gone from one extreme, which is indoctrinating them into a religion, to giving them almost nothing at all. We teach their minds, we work with their minds, we work with their physical selves. What we don't work with are the emotional and the spiritual.
Young people have taken a stand to stand up for rights, regardless of whose rights they are. They do stand up. My son is like 6, and he comes home and tells me these stories, and I think to myself, go young people. That being said, if we don't start changing the system, they're still going to be going into a system that still exists.
Wayne said that it can't just be like a once and done kind of thing. So it would have to be a continual exchange, and just sort of making it, building up a momentum or a critical mass where we can start to see a difference.
If you see systemic racism happening in your workplace, anywhere within your community, call it out.
There's a quote I love. It's a quote from Chief Orville Looking Horse. He says, "We are in this time and in this place to personally change the course of humankind. Do you think you were put here for something less?" I love that quote. And I think that's what we need to teach our children, that they are here for great things, but that they can change humankind.
It can be daunting to try to change attitudes. Some of those in authority see equality as a loss of power rather than a gain of resources. But while we struggle to change things at the top, let's look at the growing potential to see things differently that many of our youth embody.
Maybe it is the next generation, because they said 7 generations. We talked about that, and 8 generations. So we're the 7th, but the 8th are making the difference.
I don't want to see a world where that stuff goes on forever, And I think if everyone starts to believe like that, it can most definitely happen.
What makes you two different from each other?
I used to not like letters, but now I like letters. I do not like letters at all. Lucy loves tomato sauce, and I do like it, but I don't love it as much as Lucy.